Welcome to the podcast, Alexa. It's so lovely to have you here and to see your face across the screen again, because we did a bit of work together for a time when you did the Healing Birth Practitioner training course with me a couple of years ago now. And
Yeah.
yeah, and we had a real connection, you and I. Like, that was our first meeting, and I was like, oh yeah, kindred spirits. We felt it.
Yes. I love when I get that feeling too. And it was so
Oh,
beautiful to connect with you and feel that, be like, yep, here's someone that speaks my language, that sits where I sit and has the
yeah.
same heart philosophy, I think, that I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we still have yet to meet in person, and it is going to happen.
One day it's gonna happen.
Yeah, it also feels really beautiful to have you on the podcast this week, given that it was just not even a week ago that I interviewed Sarah for the podcast episode that episode number 69, if you're listening, but it's the one preceding this one. Um, And that was such a powerful story. Like, oh my goodness, I was kind of blown away. And you were her doula through that, through her second birth, her kind of really healing birth experience. And so it feels really beautiful to have you on this week following that. Yeah.
That is really beautiful synchronistic timing. I haven't listened to that yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. And Sarah is still a really dear person in my life. And
Yeah.
we
I think,
shared, we shared a really beautiful birth together
yeah.
through
Well,
that.
you will love listening to that podcast episode, because oh my goodness, she talks about what an important piece you were on that huge journey for her. And I would love to today to really like delve into your doula work and what how that came about, and what it's about. What is, birth doula work all about? But I know that to begin that story, we need to hear about your start to motherhood, right? Like your birth experience with your daughter Matia, who's 6 now, or just about 6.
Almost 6,
Almost.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So take it away.
Yeah. So I there's a little piece before that, which was how it all began, which is when I was about 18, I got invited to be a part of a friend's birth. And she wasn't like a close friend, but something in her knew that she needed me at her birth. So little 18-year-old me arrived at her home and was awake with her in the night and supporting her labor. And then we moved to hospital and she had a vaginal birth in hospital. And it's just really curious that that's where my story started. She knew at that age, she was 22 or so, that she saw something in me at that age that said, hey, come and be at my birth, when I hadn't thought anything about it before that. And so that was a beautiful, like, introduction. But I realized I was out of my depth a little. Like, I don't know what I was supposed to be doing here, really. And the way that I generally go about life is, if I'm going to go into something, I want to know all about it. So I knew that I wanted to birth. So fast forward a few years, and I'd been traveling the world and met my partner, my daughter's dad, um, not together now, but we met in France. And I had this baby dream for a long time. I was like, oh, I really wish for having a baby, but I was just waiting until he said he was ready. And then at some point, 6 years into our relationship, we were in New Zealand. We were living in a yurt in the top of the South Island that we'd built. And this passion for becoming pregnant and having a baby became bigger and bigger. And so I went really deep into learning about it. So I was listening to podcasts and I was reading books, and I met Dr. Sarah Buckley. She came to Nelson and we just, it was like deep focus. Oh, like we lived an hour from town, so every time I was driving in, I'd be like, it was like my favorite time. It was my time for me and my time to listen, and I'd just be absorbing all these podcasts, and just, yeah, absorbing all that birthy wisdom. And then we ended up moving land, and the old land had some like stuff attached, and I can see why the baby wasn't meant to come there. But as soon as we moved to this new land, we conceived her. And from that, I mean, I was already so deep in it, right? I was like so passionate, and kept, that whole pregnancy was this journey of like understanding physiological birth, understanding how birth works, understanding what are the best conditions for it and what you need and how to do it. And I did, because like, as a natural extension of that birth passion, I had a midwife, and so I saw her through my pregnancy, and she was really beautiful, and had lots of great qualities about her. I didn't end up calling her, but we'll get to that soon. So at some point, maybe 20 something weeks, I had this dream. It was kind of like a half awake, half asleep sort of vision come to me, and it was me crouching and giving birth outside under a tree. And I thought to myself, like, really? I'm a Taurus. I like being warm and cozy and comfortable. And I'd thought before that I'd birth inside the yurt because it's a beautiful round space, very feminine, with a fireplace. And we loved that home. But also outside the yurt was this big, huge oak tree. And I was sort of thinking, like, I can't not listen to this vision. I need to follow that. I'd seen it so clearly. I'd seen the position I was in. I'd seen what it was like, and I'd seen myself receiving her with my own hands, and I'd felt the darkness, and I'd felt the safety that I'd felt in that darkness. And so I said to my daughter's dad, I've had this vision. Let's let's follow it, because I couldn't not listen to it. And so we bought an old spa pool off Trade Me, and it was like this roundy pool, and he figured out a way to heat it up. So we filled it with rainwater, and he got these copper pipes and fit them all together so that we could light a fire, because we didn't have electricity at the time. We had like a little bit of electricity in the yurt, but just enough for lights and charging, but not enough to run a hot water system. So he had built this fireplace, and with these copper pipes running through, and we did some practice runs of it outside. Yeah, it was beautiful. And we knew at the time it would take ages to heat up. Like, it's a big pool of water. And so we did some practice runs to see, and it would take like 6 to 12 hours to get hot. Hot enough, because it was just this little copper pipe, and that's just how it worked. So we did some practice runs, and we knew that that's what it was going to take. And I loved this vision of being in water. And so I had my little stall at the market at the time, and I think I was like I got to 40 weeks, and it was a Saturday. And I know what I know about birth is that first time mums often birth 41 and a half, 42 weeks sort of time frame. That's like a really common birth time for first time mums. And so I wasn't really thinking it would be that soon, even though it's 40 weeks. But went home, and I thought to myself, I just need one more day to rest in case. And so I had that Sunday to rest. And then that Sunday night, sort of like Monday morning at about 1 in the morning, I woke and I could feel wet between my legs. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. And what I also know about babies and first time mums is that it can take a really long time. And if you are birthing in the night, or starting labor in the night, a really good idea to do is go back to sleep. But of course, when you're having your first movements and first contractions and sensations, it's also very exciting. So it was very hard to go back to sleep. So we kind of woke up. My partner was like, "Oh, let's keep this. This is happening." And so we got up and we cleaned the whole yurt and we set up a birth space and we had my birth altar there. And we made a big soup so that I had food during the labor. And then we kind of lit the fire. It was October, so it was we lived in a place called Tapawera, so it's pretty cold that time of year. But so we lit the fire and then just kind of snuggled on the couch, and I mean, they were really mild at that point, and just sort of like woke and cuddled and kissed and went back to sleep while until morning came. And then morning came and I thought I want to go for a walk outside around the land. And it was the most beautiful experience because around the land was calves and baby chickens and lambs all around. And I was like, wow, I'm birthing in this really beautiful springtime and this time where it felt right. It felt like this is the right time to birth because they're all around, they were all having their babies, so I might as well have my baby now too. And we went and told, so we lived on land with a couple of other families. So we like walked around and told them, and the contractions were getting like a little bit more intense by that stage. So I'd sort of like crouched down in the grass. I was just barefoot. I had this beautiful dress that I'd chosen to wear and I'd braided my hair. I was like, I want this to be beautiful and I want it to be like a ceremony. And I just remember loving being barefoot walking around the land and telling them our news. And we started the heating of the birth pool in that morning. And the day just sort of went along. And I guess it was pretty textbook in the way that it did start at a point and it did get more and more and more intense as the day went on. And I think that's probably because I felt safe and comfortable and I was caring for my body. I was still eating and drinking a lot. I had lots of different teas. I had raspberry leaf tea and I had coconut water. I had I'd really prepared for that. I had all of the things in mind that I knew would keep my body. I mean, I think sometimes when a labour gets long, it's because a body wasn't nourished, because you're doing such a massive job. And if that body is cared for, that's one of the pieces of the puzzle. It's not all of it, but it's one of the pieces that help you to be supported through labours, it's so huge. It's like I always say, it's like preparing for a marathon.
Yeah.
You need to eat and sleep and drink and so I was really following that, which felt right and good. I wanted to have a free birth. I'd met somebody in my pregnancy journey and she was like, I just birthed my baby at home with my partner there. And I was like, oh, is that an option? I just hadn't even thought that I mean, this is 6 years ago. It feels like ages. But I hadn't even thought at that point that was sort of an option. But she said it, and she said it so simply and so beautifully. And I was like, I think I'd like to do that. It feels right. It feels like, from what I know about birth, it's best undisturbed. It's best without somebody getting in there and putting their fingers in your vagina. And you know, they say that the first intervention is leaving your home. And I resonate with that a lot. And there's a lot of, yeah. Anyway, she said it so simply and beautifully, and I sort of thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I talked to my daughter's dad about it, and he said, but it's our first time. Like, we should just have our midwife for our first time. And I was like, but I really see it like this. This is what I feel. I can feel it, and I know that I can do it, and I really have infinite trust in my body, and I know the things that would take me into my mind. I'm a thinker. I wanted to be only in my body, and I know that if I'd had measurements or numbers or beeping or lights, all of that, I would have started thinking, and therefore come out of my body. And I knew that in that birth space, I needed to birth in sync with my body. So we kind of came to an agreement, and we said, if I said, let's, if we need her, we'll call her. If we don't need her, we won't call her. And that felt good for both of us. Like, that was our compromise that we made. That was like, I want this. And he said, okay, I will support you. Also, if we need her, we'll call her. And we're like, okay. So that came to be the agreement.
Awesome.
So we got to, the day progressed and things started getting more and more intense. And I was in the yurt in the afternoon, and we had this, me and Benji, my daughter's dad, had made together like a braided red cord rope that we hung off the crown of the yurt. And so I could swing on it and hang on it. And I've got these gorgeous pictures, I can send them to you, of like that, just this light coming in the roof of the yurt, and us, just him supporting me, and me like just deep in this process, using the rope to support the weight of my body so I could move and I could dance. And I was had my favorite songs on. There was a lot of music in there was a lot of movement in my body, lots of singing, lots of dancing, and had a hot water bottle on my tummy. And I had this beautiful birth altar that I had this amazing mother blessing, and everybody had bought a candle. We had them all on the altar, and I lit them, and it was just like this array of, I've got my sisters with me. And I was just watching them while I was getting deeper and deeper into my trance, and knowing that those sisters were all with me and holding that energy for me at the same time. And they had their own candles lit at home. So at the same time, we were like kind of connected by these candles, which was really special.
Gorgeous.
Started to get, and so the reason why I have these beautiful photos too is because I, funny old me, decided I didn't want to have a midwife, but I did want to have a photographer because I love birth. I've been so passionate about it for so long that I wanted to see what I was like birthing and what it was like. So she'd sort of arrived near like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock sort of ish, as the sun was near heading down. So she'd taken these beautiful photos of us in the yurt, and soon after that, the birth pool was getting hot. And I was like, okay, yeah, I think I'm ready for that release, and I'm ready for being in the water. And so I went and hopped in and loved every moment of being in the water. There's a beautiful video too of me singing. I'm like, yes, life, yes, dancing at your feet, yes, life, yes, to the great mystery, yes, life, yes. We celebrate everything. And just being like in the water with this music, and just totally in my own strength and totally in my own power and totally, absolutely in my body. And I remember closing my eyes at a point, and I probably from then, and I just was going deep, deep, deep in, more and more in, more and more in. And I felt absolutely connected with all of my ancestors. It was like all of the insight and wisdom that I'd been connecting with through podcasts and books, as well as all of the connection of my ancestors, like my mother who's birthed, her mother who's birthed, like felt like this incredible connection with the entire universe of all of the people that have birthed before me. and all of these like little bits were coming through just as I needed them to. They were about when to move or how to move, or the trust that was coming through, or the faith and the knowledge that everything was just as it was supposed to be. There was not a worry in my mind. Like, there was no thought about should I call the midwife, or no thought about should I go to hospital or anything like that. I could absolutely feel in my body that this was right and good, and I trusted in that, and I could feel my baby Martia moving in there sometimes, and felt like I could feel her kind of like do her little shift in position into how she needed to come. And honestly, it just all felt so right and so good. Like, this is what it's supposed to feel like. And it got darker and darker, and Benji had burnt his hand on the fire while he was heating it up. So he had lavender oil on his hand, and there was just the smell of lavender through the space,
Mm.
because through the outside, I suppose. But there was just the smell, and it's still such a power connecting smell to me. I still smell lavender. I'm like, that day, that much power that I felt connected with.
Mm.
And so we went, yeah, it just got deeper and deeper and darker and more and more and more in. And I was just, by that point, just totally in a trance, totally feeling my body, totally, yeah, just in, the trance of labor. And Benji was there, and I'd sort of said to him, like, can you just on this day just do anything that I need? And he's like, yep. And I was like, I would just be like, give me a tea, or he would massage me on my shoulders a lot, or I didn't actually need much at all from him, except at one point he was holding my hands, and I was like, I just needed to just look at me. I just need to know that you are 100% with me. So he's like holding my hands and like very present. He
Mm.
did drum for me too, which was really a powerful experience to have that drumming in the background slash foreground, I suppose.
Mm.
Um, and then I got to like 10 o'clock or 11, 10 or 11 or something like that. I don't know. It was timeless for me, but I think I saw that on the birth photo times. Um, and Talitha, who's my birth photographer. So I remember like opening my eyes sometimes and seeing her, and she'd just sort of sitting over there, and she'd be like eating her avocado or reading her book. And I was like, ah, yeah, she's fine. This is fine. She's just there. But at some point she was tired, and she went into the yurt and she lit the fire. And she went in there because she saw me, and I started to fall asleep. So
Mm.
I was getting tired, and I was like just falling asleep in the birth pool. And Benji would like prop my head up so I wouldn't go under. But I was
Mhm.
like fall asleep, and I even like snored a little bit because I was just I was so relaxed
Mm.
and just falling asleep. And she thought, oh gosh, this is gonna be ages. So she went inside and thought she'll go to sleep. And then a few minutes later, um, I I was sort of like waking in between that, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And then I
Mm.
thought to myself, hang on, I know what that means. When you actually feel I can't do this anymore, it means your baby's coming. So I reached down, and I could feel like a little bit of her head. And I was like, oh my God. And I called Talitha, like, come, like, I can feel her head. It was only a few minutes after that. So I know now that there was transition, and that was my body taking a beautiful rest and
Mm.
break before it started the next chapter of pushing. And
Mm.
so I was kind of like, I was still really sleepy then. I was like sleeping, and then I'd wake up and I'd feel. So I was blessed, I suppose. I had the experience of fetal ejection reflex. Obviously, you know this, maybe people listening don't know this, but it's when your body is pushing your baby out. There's no part of me that in my mind was going, I'm pushing my baby out. It was like, it's almost like vomiting, you know, you've got no control over it, just sort of go, "Wah!" And it was a really similar sound. It was, I was like hearing myself make these sounds like, ah, and having no control over it. And that was actually one of the hardest parts for me, because the whole rest of my labor, um, I'd kind of coached myself or supported myself, or I had the tools and the techniques and the strategies that I needed. And in that moment, I had absolutely no control, and I had to fully, absolutely surrender to that pushing of my body.
Mm.
And even then, I remember when that was happening, I could still feel her little kicks. Like it felt like my body would push, and she would be like, "Oh!" Like it was a real team. It was a real team effort, and it was so beautiful to do that with her, and feel that that teamwork there. And then started to feel, it's funny because I want to tell you, oh, I was pushing for this long or something, because it's so standard in a birth story, but I've got no idea. I've got I don't know, I just pushed until she came, like my body pushed until she came. There was no
Yeah.
like, this is wrong or this is right. It just was, which
Mm.
is really beautiful. Suddenly felt the burning ring of fire, and that was intense. So same like the rest of my labor, I'd be like, yes, and then her head came, and I was like, fuck, that hurts. And it's kind of cute on the video because my daughter obviously loves watching it. We watch definitely every year for her birthday, but she's really curious about watching it. And she's always like, you said fuck, mum. And I'm like, yeah, your head was coming out of me. It wasn't it wasn't burning, but it was really burning. And she came, like, I remember she came, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 times. She would like she was doing her mission, stretching and then going back in. And at some point I was like saying like, come baby, come baby, come, like just wanting her to actually come, because she was coming like back and forth so like this few times. And I think I hadn't anticipated that. Sort of thought it'd be like head and then come, but no, it was a few stretchy times and a bit of encouragement from me to say come, like welcome. And then her head came through, and I reached down and I could feel these two tiny ears, and I just felt like so much love. Absolutely overwhelmed with love. Like, there's this person that I'm gonna love so much, and that's her tiny ears I can feel. And I thought, I'll just check if I can feel the cord around her neck. And so I reached and I could feel, and it was. And I sort of thought to myself, I think I'd like her out now, her whole body. So in that moment, there was a little bit of consciousness from me, like, okay, I'm gonna push. I think it was with a contraction, but it was more like, okay, let's go, let's get her out. So I pushed her out into the water, unwrapped the cord under the water. What I know now, I would have rolled her around. What I did at the time was unhook it around her head. But if you've got a cord around, you can obviously just turn the baby around and it will unwrap, but it worked anyway. And then she was just bringing her up to the surface of the water, and I could see she opened her eyes underwater. And it just was really honoring that as a very slow, sacred process. And just to see her opening her eyes and looking up at me from under the water was just this like mind-blowing moment that will stay in my mind forever. First to feel her ears, and then to see her, she's still got really big blue eyes. To see them like looking up at me under the water was just like, wow. And then brought her up to my chest and held her and just she made this little sound like a little cat, and it was just the most beautiful moment. And then we kind of realized that it was a bit cold by then. I mean, the whole time the pool had felt beautifully warm and the temperature I needed it to be. I forgot that I hopped out of the pool at some point for about an hour because I thought I need to pee and I haven't done that for ages. So I was like crouched on the grass for a long time trying to focus on peeing because I think her head was like just in the way a little bit. But I was like, I know I need to do this. This feels really important. So I like crouched ages out in the grass and it was freezing, but I didn't realize. Um, but when she was born, it felt like the temperature was perfect. Like even now, if I'm at a birth, I might like pay a little bit of attention to what the temperature of the pool was. But by feeling in that moment, it felt right, and it felt like the temperature that needed to come. But the outside air was cold, so we decided to go inside. So like climbed out of the pool holding baby umbilical cords still going inside me and walked inside the yurt, and thankfully Talitha had lit the fire, so it was already really warm and cozy in there. So we went and snuggled, kind of cuddled her inside. Then we sort of realized that I mean, it's a really massive transition that anyone makes from being inside to being outside and starting to make the shift between living inside and not using your lungs to using them outside and starting to breathe. And so we sort of looked at her and we were like, her breath it just wasn't, she had like a little bit of effort to breathe. And I know it's normal and it does take time, but in that moment we were like, okay, maybe we call the midwife now. So we called her and said, can you come? And she's like, oh, you had the baby, did you? And we're like, oh, yeah. She knew that we were in labor, but I think she was maybe anticipating longer. And she was actually at the hospital at the time at another birth. So I'm really grateful that she didn't come earlier because so she arrived. By the time she'd arrived, Marty was breathing fine. She sort of talked us through on the phone what to do, like check that, give her a few breaths. Benji gave her a few breaths with his mouth, and yeah, she kind of like said to rub her and things like that. But by the time she arrived, she was breathing fine. By the time the midwife arrived, and then came this part that it was like my least favorite part of the birth, which was birthing my placenta. And this part is now a huge part of my practice, and actually every birth that I've been at has had a very beautiful, powerful, easy placenta birth, which is why I think this piece happened, because it's actually formed so much of how I support that puzzle piece with women when I work with them. So she came and she was sort of like, she was in the energy. She was in between a hospital birth. She was beautiful, such a beautiful woman. But there's rules in the medical system which say you have to have a placenta out within this time frame. And she came with that. And she came with, okay, we have to get this placenta out. So go in this position. So do this. So I'm going to pull it. So she knew I didn't want any drugs. So she's like, have this homeopathic. And there was just like this managed situation. And the self-responsibility piece on my part is that I'd just been in labor for 24 hours. I just birthed my baby. And at that moment, someone with authority and knowledge about birth, not not about my body, but she has. So as soon as she came in, the power dynamic shifted, and I thought, I'm just gonna, I've done a lot. I'm just gonna let go now and give this part to you. And so I just followed as she instructed. And I didn't like it. It was hard and it was uncomfortable, and I didn't like the pressure, and I didn't want anything else through my vagina after I just had a baby through there, 'cause it felt sore already. And anyway, it came after some management, and I had a second degree tear, which she stitched. Looking back, I wouldn't stitch if I had the commitment to spending 6 weeks in bed. If I made that commitment and I had a second degree tear, I wouldn't have got that stitched up. But I did at the time, and it felt really great to do that at home in my bed, not to like with the light of a head torch in this dark space. And then we went to sleep. Oh, I tried to get her to breastfeed, but it wasn't, just didn't happen before we went to sleep. So then we all went to sleep at like 1 or 2 in the morning, had a good 5 hours sleep, and woke up in the morning. That was actually funny because that was the first, we had a little wahakura, and I put it at the side of our bed and just had this like long sleep after birth, which was delicious, and then woke up and motherhood began, kind of in the way of feeding and things. But when I woke up in the wahakura, and I reached out to touch her in the morning, and she felt cold. And I was like, I couldn't feel her because she wasn't right beside me. So every day since then we slept together. And I love that because then I could
Yeah.
feel her after that all the time. She wasn't like, I mean, it was only just there, but she was cold and I didn't feel her.
Yeah.
And so we, yeah, spent the
Just,
next
just for listeners,
while cuddling and sleeping together.
just for listeners, yeah, a wahakura is like a woven flax bassinet or basket for the baby to sleep in. So you have the wahakura on the bed, and that's, yeah, where the baby can sleep.
And then we began our new days as a new family of 3. And breastfeeding it was harder than I thought it would be. I thought that I would just pop my baby on my boob and off you go. And all of my birth and all of my preparation for birth, I hadn't considered quite what it would be like for breastfeeding, and I hadn't done much research into it. So yeah, I had this naive assumption that it's easy, that you just pop your baby on your boob and off you go. And that wasn't to be for me. It got tricky. There was like lots of trying of different positions and football hold, and this is how you latch the baby. It was really like interfered with in lots of ways. And then there was like oversupply and too much milk on this side and not on that side. And then she was having a sore tummy, and it was like it turned into this quite intense process. So at about 10 days old, I got invited, offered by a dear friend of mine to do a closing in the bones ceremony. And I remember at that point having in my head that, gosh, it's so funny how vulnerable this is, but it's human and it is what it is. And what I was still holding on to at that point, because I was a new mother, 10 days in, I was holding on to, my life has to look perfect on the outside, and my house needs to be tidy and clean, and there's all these people coming into my house. And I went into what I now would call my masculine, where I went into do mode, and it was the first time I'd had Matia in the carrier, and I was trying to do the dishes, and I was trying to sweep the floor and make it all perfect for when these people arrived for the ceremony, because I wanted it to be beautiful. And that night I got a fever, and I woke like shaking. My whole body was like shaking, shaking, shaking. I was like, I do not know what's happening in my body. And my boob was all red and hot, and like I couldn't, that fever, I've never felt a fever like that. It was the most intense shaking physical feeling of my whole life. And I was on the phone to the midwife in the night, and she came up the next day, and it was the beginning of journey of mastitis,
Mm.
which turned it really, it was really, really, really intense for me. I ended up getting a staph infection on my nipple. And so, like, literally half of my nipple was a hole. It had, like, got, same
Same
with you.
here. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was like flesh, like, eaten away. It was gnarly. And it ended with a, what do you call it? I want to say a cyst, but like a,
Abscess.
abscess, that's right. Ended with an abscess in there that had to, so we had to go to the hospital and get, God, it's still sore, it's funny. We had to go to the hospital and get that drained out with a needle, because what had happened, I was trying to like treat it really naturally, and but I'd left it too long, and it had formed the seal, like my body had formed this like protective seal around it so it wouldn't leak into the rest of my body, which turned it into the abscess.
Mm.
And then I'd stopped getting the fevers because my body had made that protection, so it didn't think that there was anything. It wasn't still battling it. But yeah, ended in hospital and antibiotics. And that took, that hole in my nipple took about 7 months to heal.
Mm.
So I was still feeding on it. I was still really dedicated to breastfeeding. Breastfeeding felt like ultimately really important to me. And so I still fed on that nipple, even though I was like tensing in pain, and so like I'd have to like bite something because it was so painful. But breastfeeding was really important to me.
Mm.
So I went through it and finally ended with those silverette cups. And that was the only thing that actually helped it, because it could protect it all the time and keep that beautiful, healing, clean environment in there. But what, I mean, we talk about being a doula, and there's a couple of things that really form my practice, and one is my placenta birth. So now when I work with women, in one of our sessions during pregnancy, we do a placenta vision. And I mean, I've had this conversation with midwives before, and I'll say, so what's your first port of call for a placenta birth? And they'll be like, oh, homeopathics, or the oxytocin or pitocin
Mm.
injection. And I'm like, my first port of call comes way before that, which is simply with a vision. And the vision is like, you're pregnant. Sorry, not you're pregnant. You've just given birth to your baby. You're holding them in your arms. You're looking at them with so much love and respect and adoration. And then you remember, oh, it's not quite done yet. I've got one more job to do. And then you might feel, or you might not feel the placenta, and it'll feel like a weight in the base of your spine. And then you'll say to someone, pass me the placenta bowl, and the bowl will arrive, and then you'll gently move using gravity, or move into a slightly different position to help, like, let gravity bring out your placenta, and then your placenta is born into the bowl. And honestly, and a lot of mums I've worked with have gone, I've got one more job to do. And then they'll birth their placenta. And it's so beautiful that
I love that.
the awareness is like by far the first step before
Mm.
any kind. I mean, there's many things you can do along the way before it comes to having an injection.
Yeah.
But to start with, this is how it happens. This is how it physiologically happens. This is what's going to happen next. This is what it's going to feel like in your body. That's a real, I think it's beautiful, because there's a lot of fear in a birth space in between the birth of the baby and the birth of placenta. So if that part of the birth is beautiful and easy and has been like really owned or thought about by the women that I work with, it's ended beautifully. all the
Yeah.
time because because it starts from that kind of place. And then the other part that I have been reflecting on quite a lot lately is that when you choose to have a free birth, you're taking all of the self responsibility. And I think birth is such a big energy that in some level it needs to be supported and held. And I can see that I free birthed and then she wasn't breathing super well. And in that moment, I already had to come back into my rational brain, my conscious brain, my brain going, is my baby okay? Rather than being in this like loving golden hour. And I wonder if that affected our breastfeeding journey.
Mm.
And I just think birth is is just so huge. And when you go and you're like, I'm gonna pre-birth, you almost I think that through my breastfeeding journey, I called in the support that I'd chosen not to have via
Mm.
free birthing. And I just think there's something in that. And I think that I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen with other mamas, how, yeah, it's just something that I've been thinking about lately in
I,
terms
I
of,
I would love to talk about this a little bit more because it's something that I've been contemplating more myself, since I've been hearing a lot more stories of free birth. So you saying that 6 years ago you didn't even know it was like a thing. Like, can I do that? Like, not call the midwife. I was exactly the same until even more recently. I didn't really know it was a thing. Like, yeah. So it's been inviting me to consider lots about if I was to give birth again now, which isn't going to happen. I'm long past my birthing days, but if I was, would I free birth, or would I still birth at home with a midwife present, or you know, and yeah, I think for me, I love having the wise woman presence. I loved being witnessed. I loved that yeah, like I didn't have to have all the pressure on myself to know all the things to, if I felt a little shaky, I could ask. I
mm,
could I could lean on their trust in what was going on
mm,
when my trust might have been wavering. That sort
mhm.
of thing, like for me, having that wise woman presence and, you know, I was in that fortunate position of being a midwife myself, so really knowing who the good, quote unquote, good midwives were, the wise women midwives, the ones who wouldn't
Yeah,
interfere with my physiology, who knew how to really hold beautiful safe space for me to be able to birth the way I needed to, I was meant to. And I guess those midwives are becoming harder and harder to come by, and I realize now that it doesn't need to be a midwife necessarily, although for some people that might
exactly.
feel more safe. But just somebody who trusts birth, right?
Yep,
And
yep.
knows how to hold reverence, respect, and yeah, care and consideration through witnessing birth and witnessing being present with a woman
Yeah.
as she goes through that. Yeah.
I believe in that completely, and that's like I've supported free births, and that's exactly what the women are calling for. They want someone who knows birth and who respects it and who isn't going to interrupt it or
Yeah.
disturb the process. And unfortunately, I think our midwifery care is tricky because it's free to a New Zealand woman, but then it's paid by the government. Therefore, you have to meet these standards that
Mhm.
are requested and required. And it's sometimes those standards that are causing the unsafe births.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even the most beautiful, I mean, there are a lot of beautiful local midwives here, are still under that time limits, and it's really, really tricky. I think like what you just described with the wise woman, like that's the kind of birth I would like to, that
Mm.
it's held and supported and honored and respected, but not, and that you're cared for amongst it. I mean, the option I chose at the time was free birth, and that felt amazing and radical, and it was transformational, and it gave me so much strength, and it gave me all of this trust in myself, and it shaped my path and my journey into being a mother.
Yeah.
But it also, it switched me, what I said before, it switched me into my masculine. It switched me into like, I think if men were to birth, they would free birth. It's very masculine. It's like, I'm going to free birth. I'm going to do this. And I relate with that. That was where I was sitting, was like, I'm a badass. I'm going to do that. And at the moment, with the last few years, I'm like actively revolting against that. I'm like, no, what is it like to be supported, held, respected, honored, to be within that frame with birth? And I think that that could have had a really different impact on my birth and
Mm.
the postpartum time. It's
Mm.
like being able to call in that support.
Yeah, I love
But
that distinction you made, or that insight you gave around feeling the need to step into to be in your masculine, right? And I think having a wise woman presence would enable us to be more in our feminine and our flow and our trust, and just yeah, and not have to be thinking or doing, right? Like the moment you're doing that, you are kind of interfering with your physiology, actually.
yep.
Which might, you putting Matia into the Wahakura might be an example of that, off the back of that experience with the placenta birth. You kind of stepped into this other, like, oh yeah, the next thing we do is, the baby goes in the Wahakura, like,
Sh-
whereas
She
if you,
told me to.
yeah,
Yep.
right, the
Yep.
midwife told you to, right?
Yep. Yep. And I'd given up my power then in that
Yeah,
space of time.
yeah.
So I just listened to what
Yeah.
I think about it, and we were talking about it just before we started the podcast about how much our conditioning as women affects our way to birth, and that you need to go beyond, like, here's antenatal education, here's all I know about that I've researched from my podcasts, here's all I've read from books, and then there's this other layer of conditioning of, she told me to, so I should do it. A good girl does this, a good girl is quiet, a good girl make sure her house is clean and tidy when guests come around. Like, there's so much beyond all the research you can do. There's a whole bunch of like unpacking all of the conditioning that we have as women, and that's what I do a lot in my doula work. Is like, they'll say something, I'll be like, why
Yeah.
why do you think that? Where does that come from? Tell me about that part of why you think that that's the right choice.
Oh, so Alexa and I just went off on a bit of a tangent that you're not privy to, because because it wasn't appropriate for the podcast. But now we're like, oh, where do we come back to? Because we can't kind of remember where the tangents are. But that's okay. What I would love to ask you about is, in your role as a doula,
Mhm.
um, and quite clearly you have a practice that is more holistic, right? And probably a lot of more mainstream, I'm using air quotes here, doulas, how they would work. And I wonder if you have any personal boundaries for yourself around who you will work with, knowing that, yeah, what you stand for when it comes to birth, and what's important to you in your what you see is important in the role of support people, doula, care. Yeah, what is there anything that's coming to mind that you'd like to share with regards to that?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't work with just anybody, and it sounds kind of like pretentious or something to say, but I really believe that birth is such a sacred, beautiful space, and it needs to be honored. And for me to enter that sacred, beautiful space, I need to feel in full alignment with the people that I'm working with the family I'm working with, and they the same.
Mm.
And so we always do a first meeting and feel each other out. And lots of the good questions are asked then. And I'm like, bring them all on, please. I'm like, come to me with a list of questions, please, because I need to know where you're at in your mind, what you're thinking about, how you are, how you see birth at the moment, what your vision is for your birth. And I I need to hear their vision and feel my vision, and the feeling together is important. That's actually the most important thing. I don't have like I won't work with someone who wants to birth at hospital, for example. Though I would that sometimes there's the occasion that that's needed, but I'm not like radically like only home birth or something like that. But I am radically, we both need to feel the alignment. And this beautiful thing tends to happen when I'm supposed to work with someone is there'll be beautiful alignment. One of my clients lived just like randomly in the country by Peterson Road, which is my last name. And then another client handed me in our first meeting my favorite teacup that I've got at home. She gave me the same one. And I'm always like listening for those. And then I know this is that then I'm meant to work with them. I can feel it, or there's a little sign somehow externally. And yeah, it's not about a judgment of people. It's about an alignment of soul and spirit, and with the depth and honor and respect that I see that I have for birth, it needs to be right in that way for me. So
Mm.
I've had a few meetings with people on the first time and just not quite felt it and haven't gone further and haven't regretted my choice. I trust that I know that, and I also trust beyond that that there will be a perfect person to work with them.
Mm.
That it's not me. I'm not like so egotistical that I think that I'm the only person, so I take every person on. I don't believe that. I think, and I'm also open to it hasn't happened because I can feel it from the first meeting, but I'm open to finishing that journey if they feel like I'm not the right person to serve them. I'm like, please don't work with me then. I'm not
Mhm.
like after the money or after
Mm.
it's not about me. It's about serving birth and serving the babies that are coming in. And that is the bigger picture. It's much more beyond me and beyond my little wants and needs as a person. And I can feel that out really, really beautifully and easily.
Can you describe to the listeners what you mean by your goal is to serve the babies that are coming through? What do you mean by that?
I mean that I believe that the souls coming through at the moment have a special vision and quest for life. And for that to happen, they need to have beautiful, empowered mamas who are birthing them on their own terms with their own choices. And sometimes when I work with a client, it's almost like it's because I'm meant to be there for the baby, that the baby's got their wants and their needs, and they need to have this experience on earth that they've chosen. I believe that the babies have chosen their two parents and their mission, and they've chosen this time to come through. And in that way, they're needing their support team to offer certain things so that they can have this start in life, so that their parents, I mean, it's massive. Birth is so massive. I don't get it. I was in this sauna the other day, and there was a family talking, a guy in there talking about he was paying $40,000 for their wedding. And I was like, how are people paying $40,000 for a party and won't pay $2,000 for a doula when the way that you birth and the way that it forms your mothering, it forms your baby's future, and it forms your, like, how, I mean, babies come in with their own lessons too. I don't say that all babies come to have easy births. They come to teach what they need to teach as well. And but I just don't understand why somebody would invest so much on a party for one night and then not on themselves or on their empowerment and on their future relationship with their children. It's crazy.
Because of unexplored conditioning is probably the most simple answer to that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do love that you're speaking into this, and like just coming back to the example of your experience with Matia in the Wahakura, like that's a much less intense or invasive kind of example to use, but it is an example nonetheless, where we have in our modern day sort of culture of birth and parenting, this, like, there's this separation of mother and baby in the vast majority of births. Like, very few are left undisturbed after the baby is birthed. There is usually at some point the baby is taken off the mother's body, whether that's to weigh them or to check them over or to give them a vitamin K injection or to wipe them down and dress them, or all the things. And it's like, why are we hell-bent? Who do we think it's serving when we separate a newborn from its only source of life, love, comfort, anything, nutrition, that it's experienced for the entirety of its life up until that point? Why do we think that that is somehow, and even when we know, when we've got all the evidence, like if we think about babies that end up needing to be in the neonatal intensive care units, we know that they do so much better when they are kangaroo cared for, when they are supported to be on their mother's skin to skin as much as possible. Like with all the tubes and things, sometimes that's absolutely necessary part. But we know that babies better regulate their temperature, their heart rate, their breathing rate. They do much better with breastfeeding. All the things they do better, because it's not just a physical experience. It's a spiritual, emotional, psychological experience that's taking place as well. And we just, because babies can't speak, I guess, because they can't, articulate what's going on in their world at that time, we kind of just seem to not pay it any respect or care or concern. But I think this is just so important to the healing of humanity, is this ensuring that the start is a loving, we should be born into love. And I see we're so often born into like fear and trauma and pain.
Yeah. That was so, there's so many parts of that which informed why I birthed like that too. So I was like, I don't want my baby who's been in my dark, cozy womb to come out into a room with like bright lights and strangers and be welcomed with gloves on. I was like, I'm gonna be the one that loves her the most. I need to be the first one that touches her and welcomes her with my own bare hands, these hands that are just gonna love her all up. Even I asked, when I thought about the midwife coming, I said, can you just not wear gloves? I want you to be I don't want her to be welcomed with. She needs to be welcomed with the love of the person that's gonna love her the most. And
Absolutely.
another point on that is that we wouldn't even think about doing it with kittens or puppies. If you had kittens
Mm.
or puppies born in your house, no way would you take them away from your mother. There's like that old thing of like if a human touches you, they're then gonna smell like them,
Mhm.
the baby, and they might reject their baby. Why do we do it to babies
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
if we wouldn't do it to
Absolutely. Yeah.
animals that we're raising? I don't know why we would take them away from why we take our babies away.
I think this is, part of the kind of nature's design why human babies, they have all this blood left in their umbilical cord and placenta at the time of birth, because, and it takes a bit of time for that to transfer into the baby's body. And whilst that's happening, the placenta is still inside the mum, and so the baby can't go anywhere. Baby has
Can't.
to be on mum
It's so
for that
true.
time. Yeah.
That's so true. I love that.
But of
I
course,
love that.
medicine just decided that they would control that as well and cut these babies off from their blood supply and take them off their mothers. And yeah, the babies in most need of that blood and in most need of their mothers, perhaps ones that are born prematurely or have been distressed in labour or whatever, are the ones most likely to be whisked away, cut from that supply and whisked away. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, okay. So I know in your role as a doula, part of what you do is offer like birth debriefing with mamas, and you trained, like as I said at the beginning of the podcast, you did your healing birth practitioner training with me a couple of years ago. So yeah, I'm just wondering if there's anything you want to share about that sort of aspect, or about working with people, for women for whom trauma has been a part of their birthing history. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's definitely like since taking that course, I've definitely absorbed that as a really crucial part of my practice too. If someone's birthed before, there will be a story there and there will be some feelings around that. And I've noticed that sometimes you can get, if you've birthed before and you've had a trauma, sometimes you can get in labor, get stuck at the same point where you had the trauma come up last time. So I'm like hyper aware of that, and I'm hyper aware of sexual abuse, meaning that this yoni vagina space isn't a safe space and needs that can also be something that halts or slows a labor. And I think the relationship that you form as a doula is really deep and it's really about getting to know each other's heart, soul, body. And so we go there, we go into those depths, and definitely a part of what, yeah, like embracing the wisdom from your beautiful healing birth course was that debriefing together and going really like going into that story and seeing. I mean, a really big insight I got from your course is that your body, if there's been a trauma that's happened, often it's your body has reacted in a certain way, fight, flight, freeze, fawn in a certain moment. And that was your body keeping yourself safe in that moment. And I think that's a really crucial part to understand when unpacking a, st- a traumatic birth story with someone, is that your body is wise and it knows what it's doing in that moment, and it did that thing like particularly fawn. I think I've had talked to some women and they'll be like, oh, but I just said it was all right, and I can see it on online. People like, I had this birth and these things happen and I did this, and you can hear you can hear fawn
Mm.
sometimes when a birth story is told, and just understanding that that fawn is a part of keeping you safe, that when you're in danger, of course you're going to be nice to the person around you and do what you're supposed to. And like as a woman, you get back into that good girl conditioning, like doing what you're supposed to do. And
Mm.
that fawn response is, yeah, it's a common one, I think, for us. And that was really helpful for me to learn
Mm.
as we do this deep dive onto our previous birth stories. And even in my doula work, we even talk about our own birth stories, like how did we come, or our grandmother's stories, or the stories of our sisters. Like all of these are the stories that are around us, and all of those are the ones that shape us and shape our own birth.
Mm. Yeah, you talking about fawning. Sarah articulates her experience of that beautifully in the previous podcast episode. Yeah, yeah, because that was she had a very traumatic past, and that was her survival strategy. And when I say strategy, it's not something we consciously do. None of these, freeze, fawn, dissociation, etc. responses are something that we choose or
Choose.
do consciously. It's our primal brain doing its best to keep us alive in a situation that it's perceiving as threatening to our life. And so yeah, and I think having that knowledge, that understanding of like what fawning is all about, but also you said how our body is just doing what it needs to do to keep us okay, like to keep us alive in a harmful situation. It's not just the fawning, it's other things too, like the failure to progress. I had to have a cesarean because I got stuck at like 5 centimeters dilated, or I went from 8 centimeters dilated to 6 centimeters dilated, like, so they had to start the syntocin and drip or whatever. Like these stories that women are left with understanding about their births was some form of my body failed, or I failed myself or my baby. I failed at birth. And it's not you failing, it's your body trying to keep you and your baby safe. And and when we can help people to understand that that's what was happening, then that just shifts so much of like their understanding or their trust of themselves and of birth, and realizing how freaking incredible their bodies are and wise. You
Yes.
used that term before. Like our bodies are wise. They know better than the professionals how to keep us alive. For the most part, they know a lot better how to keep our birth safe, how to keep our babies safe. So yeah, there's absolutely, there's a place for medicine. Of course there is.
Yeah.
But it should be in the small fraction, the small minority of births, rather than, it should be the exception rather than the rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just like even offering that understanding and compassion unlocks so much in that body that's going to birth again. If
Yeah.
you've got that understanding, like, oh, hang on, my body's got my back. My body was protecting from
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
that, and now it's
Yeah.
now I know different, and now I can give myself the compassion for my body that acting that way. Then I know that that's like it's a puzzle piece of understanding what happened a
Yeah.
time before that can happen this time. And I work a lot with um second time mums who had a first time traumatic birth or subsequent, who were like, why didn't I why didn't I invest in a doula for the first time,
Mm.
but have realized this time
Mm.
this is I need that support, and I need someone to like have my back and
Mm.
support me on that journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something very, very, very special about working with someone who has had that trauma and then has this magnificent birth the next time, because they work through their stuff and they're healing their ancestral patterns and they're unpacking their conditioning, and it's almost huger because that birth was so tricky the first time, and then the second time has been so beautiful. That's a real common beautiful part of my work, which I love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, it's such an honor,
Mm-hmm.
gift to witness women like access that
Yes.
inner healer and
Yes.
find that like birthing goddess and like,
Yes. Yeah. I love it. Love like reading their birth stories afterwards. Do you know what I love? I love reading their birth stories afterwards, and sometimes I'm not even in it. And I'm like, I nailed my job so well if you tell that story from such an empowered place that it was like I wasn't even there.
yeah,
I love it.
yeah,
It's my new favorite.
yes. I love that you love that.
Yeah.
You know, that seeing that that is your role, like, you know, like the midwife who sits on her hands or knits in the corner of the room, her, that is her doing her job. That's
Yeah.
her setting the tone and speaking without the words. I trust you, you're doing beautifully, you've got this. You know,
Yeah.
it's that same thing, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes the less we do or the less significant we seem to the person in the moment, the more we are aptly doing our job, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how beautiful that woman come out of that birth story with them as the center,
Yes.
and
Yes.
them and their experience. Like that's all I wish for.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You're also not just an amazing doula, but a very talented photographer. Oh, I love your photography so much. And I wondered if, like you talked about wanting photographs of your birth with Martia, but I wonder if there's, do you see photography, photographing well, births, but also pregnancy photography or newborn photography, family photography? Do you see any value in that from a healing or empowering or you know, perspective?
I think what photography offers is the capturing of a moment in time. And I know it's funny because I've been with some people for their first birth and then not photographed and photographed their second, for example. And the photos, they just, they're like a symbol of strength and of empowerment and of memory of what happened in that exact moment. And in terms of, I'm trying to think, it's funny because so usually my work, I often do both hand in hand, doula and birth photography. And I often work with clients who choose home birth. So most of the births I've been at have been low trauma. So I can't, I photographed one birth which we moved to hospital and the baby had shoulder dystocia. Um, and I don't know how much she looks at those photos, but I know they hold a lot of memory and a lot of feeling for her. Um, I think they, in some way, they provide a documentation of time, right? Oh, that's right, I was doing that in the birth space, or I was hanging off the crown, or I was on the birth ball, or whatever. And it's sort of like can share the journey as a story. It's kind of like a visual story. I mean, I know I look at mine or watch my birth video when I need to feel empowered again. I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, remember how you birthed? That was so beautiful. I'll look back at the photos or the video and be like, there's your strength. It's like the photo form of my strength and of that beauty. And that's what I love capturing for people. I love being able to both witness that strength, but also capture that moment, and to it's almost like, again, this reverence and adoration, like, I see you. Look at you. Look how amazing. Look how beautiful, how embodied you are in that very moment. And I love being the witness of that moment. And
Mm.
they say with like family photos and baby photos and things like that, babies need to see that. Children need to see those on the wall growing up to show. It's like, again, for them, it's like this physical representation of their connection and love and what they share or how they're held and loved within their family. So yeah, they are healing in lots of ways.
Yeah, I couldn't.
And
Yeah.
so and beyond that is to be able to share that. It's like, not all of the births I photograph I share online. In fact, there's quite a lot that I don't. And the ones that give me permission to share, you can see those moments are transforming others who look at them.
Mm.
It's showing other people on the outside, on my social media following, this is a possibility. This is how you can birth. This is what it looks like to receive your own baby in your own hands. This is what it looks like to be supported by your midwife or your partner. This is what it is. This is that moment, that epic, incredible moment that you birthed your baby and you welcome them. Like, there's so much beauty in sharing that with the world, with the birth culture at the moment being what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. As much as it would be nice to just be able to rely on our memories do fade, and
Yeah.
it is so beautiful. I still look back on my birth videos and photographs, and it always brings up that feeling that associated with that time.
Hmm.
And in a way that I don't think reading over the stories that I wrote of their births or talking about their births would be, but having that imagery is somehow really, really powerful. And yeah, and I do love having the videos. I always suggest to people, when we're doing like planning for their healing birth experience or one of those sort of sessions, birth planning, I suggested them to think about, like, seriously consider having photos taken at the birth, even if that's, the backup midwife or your partner, or, a support person who's coming along, taking some photographs. Actually, at my friend's recent birth of her sixth baby, her oldest child,
Oh,
her son took the photos at the birth, and some video footage, and
oh,
it's like, they're gorgeous.
beautiful.
Yeah, I know.
I
How cool
love
is
it.
it? Yeah. But you can always, if after the fact, if you feel uncomfortable with them, if you don't like them, if you don't want them, you can delete photos, you can
Yep.
get rid of video footage, but you can never go back and repeat that moment and
No.
like have the opportunity to capture it. So like, just, I suggest, unless it makes you feel like you're not going to be able to surrender to the process or whatever,
Hmm.
different story. If it actually feels unsafe to
Yep.
be photographed or
Yep.
videoed, then
Yep.
like listen to that for sure. But if it's just about, I don't know, I don't want to see myself giving birth, I don't want to like that, like, I don't want to remember that, especially if you've had a traumatic first birth experience,
Birth.
haven't really been in your power in a first birth, then I could understand, like, kind of like, trust me.
Yep.
Trust me.
Yeah.
There's every possibility that you are going to feel so darn stoked that
Yep.
you captured that, because it is such an empowering thing to see yourself like
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
it's so true. That's so true. Yeah, you can't delete what you don't have.
Yeah.
And the oh, what was I gonna say? Oh, I just talking about that, like with when I do that job just as photographer rather than doula, we obviously know each other a little less, but usually then I come when things are really deep. So nobody really, by that time, mostly, there's not that much awareness that I'm even there. And sometimes I'll even use a flash, and the mums will be like, "Did you?" Did you use a flash? Like they've got no idea. They
Uh,
nobody's ever noticed, though I do. Sometimes use it, and that creates the most beautiful pictures. But it's so right. Like I'm aware of that too. If I'm going to be like just photographing, we still meet up and connect and feel them out and see like where their comfort level lies because I do not want to interrupt that process. I know birth and I need to know that they like how they are with it. Some people just wouldn't have a bar of it. Some people won't even be comfortable in front of the camera for a family photo, let alone for a birth.
mm-hmm.
Mm.
All right. Wow.
Beautiful.
So you do photography, you're a doula, you do birth debriefing or like healing birth sort of sessions. Um, how can people get hold of you if they want to work with you? Is it all in person, so they have to be local, or is there some work you do online? Like, yeah.
Yep, some I do online. So I do the healing birth ones can be online. Um, I sometimes travel for a birth. Um, within not too far, obviously, within a few hours from where I am. So I've had a few clients that we've worked online through the pregnancy and then I've traveled with a birth. Lots who are local. And I've got my Instagram page, which is alexa.doula, Doula. And there's my website, www.alexadoulaphotography.co.nz. I think those would probably be the best ways.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I will put those links as well in the show notes so people can easily find you. And yeah, we had the realization during one of our edited out pieces that that you were also doula for Tessa, who shared the story of the birth of her first baby, which was a free birth, quite recently. I don't know what episode number she would have been, but probably in the 60s. Yeah, so this is the Alexa that we are hearing about on the podcast, doing beautiful, yeah, beautiful, very much needed work in the birth space. And thank you for coming on here today and talking through your birth story with us, your journey into becoming a doula, the sort of work that you do in that role, and yeah, your photography work as well. It's been really, really lovely chatting with you.
So lovely chatting with you too. You're such a beautiful soul, and I love that you're hosting this and reaching so many beautiful women through your incredible work.
Oh.
Yes, life, yes. Dancing at your feet, yes, life, yes. To the great mystery, yes, life, yes. We celebrate everything.